Alright, taking a look at this, this is another January 2012 essay answer, and I really liked this essay reading through it, mostly because the analysis is spot on, definitions are ordered well, it reads very clearly, and as I'm going through it, I'm realizing the person who wrote this, it knows exactly what they're talking about, it's got great structure to it, and it's fluid. So I'm just going to point out the things that I like. If you look in the first paragraph, we got a definition of market failure, negative externality, demerit good, and a little bit about imperfect information. And then towards the end of this first paragraph, we see that he lists specifically the 4 methods of correcting the market failure, including the Singapore type ban, provision of information, indirect tax, and heavy fines. So this leads me to thinking that eventually he's going to discuss all 4 of these. Now, what I've been looking for is not so much the analysis, because I have seen some great essays on it, but more the evaluation. And there's one specific technique that I think you guys should really focus on, and I'm going to discuss it as I go. So the introduction, you can pause and read now. I think it's quite good. The comments are straightforward, but I want to move on. Okay, the first method he discusses are banning imports and sales of chewing gum. It's a good way of correcting market failure. And explains it quite clearly, saying you reduce the amount to 0, and it's a government intervention, and they'll use laws and regulations to correct market failure, because discarding chewing gum will be illegal, having chewing gum will be illegal. But then the counter argument, it has benefits, such as therapeutic gum. So if we ban all chewing gum, there's going to be an increase in negative externalities, because people who need that won't get it. For example, he discusses here the therapeutic gum to stop smoking. If the gum was banned, then they keep smoking, or maybe are more likely to continue and more likely to get lung cancer. Excellent argument here, which could result in government failure. Strong points. However, the government can allow therapeutic gum to be imported and sold because it's a merit good. Although some gum will be discarded, the problem should be reduced. I like this approach. It's an analysis that keeps it in the context of chewing gum. I would say there's nothing missing from this, but there is one thing I would add. And I think you kind of do it, so maybe I should have addressed that some more, is that I need some evaluation at the end of this paragraph. And I think you do say that because the government can, however, allow some to be imported and sold as a merit good, so some will still be discarded, but the problem will be reduced. The second paragraph talks about imperfect information. You go straight for it, raising awareness about discarded chewing gum, what harm it can do to the environment, urban environment. This will inform people how to do it. This would encourage people to stop. Then a great counter-argument starts right here. Right? However, a lot of people don't care and ignore the advertising. A lot of people don't care about the third parties and will carry on. As it's not a law or regulation, people will be less likely to ignore it. Will be likely to just ignore it. And advertising costs money, and if people ignore it, it's a waste. So there's an opportunity cost, as the money can be used somewhere else more effectively or efficiently. Okay, second great analysis point. Again, I suggest here putting in some evaluation. How much information is sufficient, what kind of information will need to be decided, what information would be effective. These are things that need to be determined and evaluated. Indirect tax is a good way of decreasing demand and supply of chewing gum. And again, I see a diagram, and as with any diagram, I always expect an explanation. Do not just put a diagram in place and expect the reader to know what you're talking about. So what I was expecting to see here that kind of happens is supply curve shifts left, which shows a decrease in supply, and the price will increase to keep the market in equilibrium. Spell it out to me, right? Say supply shifts from supply pre-tax to supply post-tax, reducing the quantity demanded from Q1 to Q0, as well as the quantity in the market, and price going from P0 to P1. Spell it out to me, okay? If you can do that, you cover your bases, which is really important because it's clear and it shows the reader that you know exactly what you're doing. This would decrease the demand because as price increases, demand decreases. This would mean less people will purchase chewing gum due to the higher price. Chewing gum is a luxury product. I don't necessarily agree with you there, and I'll tell you why. And the price elasticity of demand is likely to be elastic. Okay, this part is probably the only part of your essay I'm not really keen on, because point being, chewing gum is not a luxury product. Think about the small proportion of people's income that it makes up. It's like they're changing the price of salt by 20%. Well, salt may cost me 50p to 75p. If it's going to cost me a pound, I don't care. Maybe I don't buy that often. I probably buy gum more often, but changing the price a little bit, I would argue that it's not necessarily luxury product. But you could frame this in that way, right? So depending on how you explain this point, it could be argued it's elastic or inelastic. But purely based on the amount of people's income it makes up, I'll argue that it's going to be it's not a luxury product, and demand would be relatively inelastic. So this part of your analysis I don't agree with totally. So let's jump over here. Indirect tax is used to reduce the production and consumption. Okay, this is just information out of a textbook. Again, and you support it further on. Therapeutic gum is a merit good, so should not be taxed. This would increase revenue for the government. Okay, you don't elaborate on this point. You just say therapeutic gum is a merit good, so should not be taxed. Perhaps that's enough. I personally would like a little further explanation. However, you just jump right into the effect of the indirect tax. Increase the revenue for the government, and the money can be used to help tackle this problem. Indirect tax counterbalance is unlikely to totally stop the discarding of chewing gum because some people may still buy the gum and then discard it on the floor unless the direct tax is very high. This is an evaluation. The amount of the tax needs to be significant enough for it to influence people's buying decisions. All right, and I really like this last line here. Then we move on to heavy fine. A heavy fine is a good way of stopping it, as people will stop, as they do not want to pay the fine and can also raise awareness on the issue. The money can be used to help tackle those problems and increase government revenue. However, it will cost a lot of money to catch people doing this, so we can be putting up CCT, and then again, you just explain that this is probably not a great way to do it. All right, we can put fines in, but if people don't want to pay fines, and even though we could use the money to raise awareness, it's probably not going to be the most effective method. So you come through to your evaluation. And I need to change this, but let's go back here. Overall, all the ways are effective in some ways, but could potentially cause other forms of market failure. Good, and you've explained that as we went through, so there's no need for you to elaborate here. However, I think the most effective way, excellent, would be indirect tax because the tax costs less to collect than the heavy fines and can also increase the government revenue. Okay, so tax costs less to collect than heavy fines. Could be, depends on how much tax we're collecting. It could actually be more. And can also increase the government revenue. Good. The tax is likely to cover the cost of collecting the tax. We got to know what the cost of collecting the tax is, and is a good way of stopping this problem. Heavy tax is a good idea, but the method is too costly, and if the method doesn't work, then it will cause more government failure, where even if the indirect tax doesn't work, the government will still get enough revenue to invest into other methods. Okay, sounds fluid enough. Banning chewing gum is not a bad idea, but it could potentially get loosened like what happened in Singapore, and therefore demand will eventually increase back up again. Okay, evaluating the method and putting it in context of Singapore, good. If indirect tax will not have this problem, you could say indirect tax will not have this problem as long as the tax doesn't get removed or decreased. And I like this here, what you've done. You've taken a future look, right? That's not something a lot of people do. They just kind of try to look at everything today. Look out into the future. How do things change? If things stay this way, then this will be the most effective. I really like this technique. And finally, you say advertising is a good idea, but it may be a waste of money, as people may just ignore it overall. So I think indirect tax is the most effective way. You make solid points. I'm really struggling to think between. This is not 18 out of 18. I think somebody might be able to argue it with me, and it's it's not a 15. At the minimum, I think it's. If I was being harsh, this is a 15 out of 18. But I'm going to give it a 16 out of 18 and say I think there's some areas of your analysis that need cleaning up. But granted, you did really do a good job of your analysis, so you give yourself some wiggle room in making some mistakes. Your evaluation is good, not the strongest, but I'm happy to give this 16 out of 18 because there are small evaluations throughout, and ultimately you know what you're talking about, right? It comes out to me clear. Your writing structure is solid. To improve this, make it read a little bit more fluid, check your analysis, and I would say evaluate more throughout. After each technique is discussed, evaluate it a little bit, and then I'd say carry on as you're doing. But I would say overall, a strong essay.